All right, now let's discuss the characteristics of an upper versus lower motor neuron lesion. That's how a diagnosis is made, is by looking at its characteristics. If we look at the upper motor neuron lesion, which happens at the brain or somewhere in the tract, it will exaggerate all the motor responses. A lower motor neuron lesion happening after the anterior horn cell will decrease the motor responses. So let's take a look at that major concept. Upper motor neuron lesions increase or exaggerate responses, and lower motor neuron lesions decrease responses. So what do you think will happen to a deep tendon reflex? If it's an upper motor neuron lesion, it increases. A lower decreases. So let's take a look then at this entire chart of characteristics. Muscle tone will increase with an upper motor neuron lesion. Pathological reflexes are exaggerated responses, like when you stroke the bottom of a foot and boing, it'll splay out. Well, that is going to be an upper motor neuron lesion and absent in a lower motor neuron lesion. Paralysis, what do you think? Spastic or flaccid paralysis? It'll be spastic with an upper motor neuron lesion and flaccid with a lower motor neuron lesion. What we call the trophy, or it's part of the tone, it will increase with upper motor neuron lesion. Unique thing about this hypertrophy that happens with upper is it looks big, but it's really weak, so it blows out rather quickly. When we talk about lower, we're wasting away. Now, when it comes to tremors, tremors are involuntary motor responses that are repetitive. You know, some of us, when we're stressed, get a little tick. That's kind of a once response. But when you get a tremor, you get the repeated responses. With upper motor neuron lesions, they will happen after a stimulus has been removed. And we call that clonus. So you do a deep tendon reflex and then clonus. It keeps going. Versus when we're talking about a lower motor neuron lesion, this is a very unique word. Fasciculations. And if you notice that word sick, fasciculations, the muscle is sick, it's wasting away. When you look at an arm with a tangential look at it, kind of at an oblique angle with a light source on it, if it was dying, if these muscles were dying, you'd see little tremors of kind of like a muscle dying, like a bad actor, dying over and over again. So that's what we call fasciculations. So those are present with the lower. And we see with an upper, then we have that clonus response. Now, when it comes to superficial reflexes, notice the red box. On boards, they always ask, what's the rule? If there's a major rule, like increase motor with upper and decrease motor with lower. Very characteristic, very classical question. But they will also ask the exception to the rule. We expect superficial reflexes to be lost with lower, so it's not a newsflash. But when it comes to an upper motor neuron lesion, they are also decreased. So now let me ask you a question. If you lost the abdominal reflex on one side versus bilateral, unilateral versus bilateral, which problem do you think is always unilateral and which problem do you think could be bilateral? Well, guess what? Lower motor neuron lesions are always unilateral, based in a compartment or some region of your body, versus upper motor neuron lesions can be anywhere in your body. Therefore, they can be bilateral very easily. So, a decreased superficial reflex, bilateral, upper motor neuron lesion. Unilateral, lower motor neuron lesion. So remember the rule and remember the exception.